Space shudders. 50 capital ships of the Galactic Empire arrive at the edge of an uncharted system, bristling with power and arrogance. Their mission? Subjugate a forgotten race called humans. But as they open comms to deliver their demands, the only reply is laughter. Cold. Confident. Unapologetically human. What follows rewrites the laws of war, and shows the galaxy what it means when Earth stops hiding. The stars stretch like bruises across the dark, silent fold of Sector Void 197, a place so quiet even light seemed hesitant to pass through. It was the kind of place galactic cartographers labeled only once and never visited again. Until now. The flagship Vainglory Ascendant of the Empire's Fleet Detachment 7 exited warp with its escort of 50 warships, each armed, polished, and broadcast-ready. For most of the Imperial Navy, this was ceremonial conquest. For Admiral Rel Vorin, it was routine theater. Primitive signal locked, his comm officer announced. Non-standard encryption. Source: orbital relic around a neutron star. A relic? Vorin scoffed, brushing a fleck of dust from his golden cuff. Send the surrender protocol. Declare annexation under Protocol 18. Yes, Admiral. Across the system, a rusted, dish-shaped station spun lifelessly. No weapons, no fleet, no heat. Just a single rotating broadcast repeating every 6.4 seconds. This is Sol Space. Trespass and meet consequence. Vorin smirked. Consequences. Adorable. He motioned lazily toward the display. Bring the object aboard. Let's end this curiosity. But before his officer could nod, every ship's internal lights flickered. Unmarked energy pulses tickled across the hulls, so faint, so precise, that even the fleet's AI systems didn't log them. And then the power went out. On all 50 ships. Screens froze. Gravity distorted. Crew members collapsed to the floor, groaning. A sharp, humming tone echoed through every hull, like a laugh too high-pitched to be human. Then, from the darkness, a new voice. Smooth. Cold. Amused. You brought 50 ships for a single probe. That's cute. Vorin's jaw tensed. He opened his mouth, but the lights returned, and something else appeared on the central view. A ship. Not Imperial. Not known. It was obsidian and jagged, like broken glass formed into a dagger. It hadn't warped in. It hadn't moved. It had simply appeared. The Terran warship Indomitable Humor hung silently just behind the fleet, where no warp signature had been detected. Its weapons, if it had any, were invisible. Its hull shimmered like it disagreed with existing in this dimension. Identify the vessel, Vorin snapped. The ship responded before the sensor AI could. Designation: First Laugh. Affiliation: Sol Dominion. Mission: Historical Correction. The Terran voice spoke with a calm cruelty that felt colder than the void outside. Vorin stood tall. This is an unlawful intrusion into sovereign space of the Galactic Empire. Identify your commanding officer and prepare for detention. A pause. Then a video feed opened without request. A human. Lean, gray at the temples, dressed in what looked like a worn black uniform with no insignia. He sat reclined, sipping something steaming, smiling faintly. No, he said simply. Vorin blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. No. We're not doing that today. You are in violation of imaginary rules written by children who never learned what real war is. The man interrupted. You're not the first Empire to stumble out here swinging banners. You just screamed the loudest. Vorin clenched his fists. If this is some kind of intimidation. It's not intimidation, the man said, tilting his head. It's pity. One of the Imperial cruisers suddenly imploded in complete silence. No fire, no debris, just absence. A clean subtraction from the universe. Enough, Vorin growled. Power up weapons. Target that vessel. Nothing happened. Weapons didn't respond. Engines didn't warm. Even internal sensors refused to acknowledge their own existence. A different officer spoke, eyes wide with confusion. Admiral, I think we've been digitally amputated. On screen, the Terran man chuckled. You brought swords to a math fight, he said. This wasn't even a battle. This was a rehearsal. Who are you? Vorin asked, barely masking the tremor in his voice. The human sipped again. Once, we were explorers. Then you started snatching colonies from our fringe systems. You didn't know we were watching. You never even asked who we were. You assumed. Another ship vanished. Then another. No flare. Just surgical deletion. We warned you. The beacon you found? That wasn't bait. It was a line in the sand. Vorin took a step forward. Then you've declared war on the Galactic Empire. The Terran's smile grew sharp. No. You don't get war. You get a story. The story of how 1,000 civilizations rose, believed themselves infinite, and were reminded why infinity is a human word. You won't get away with this, Vorin said, now more quietly. The human leaned in toward the camera. The warmth dropped from his voice. We didn't come to get away with anything. We came to remind you. Silence followed. The stars pulsed faintly behind the Terran ship, distant and disinterested. Vorin turned to his officers, panic seeping in like water through cracks. Status on fleet systems? No answer. Every officer was frozen, eyes locked on their displays. Vorin turned. On screen, the Terran ship had multiplied. 4 more had appeared. Then 8. Then a wall of them, stretching across the void like a mirrored storm. None had warped in. They had been there all along, cloaked in timelines, bleeding into the present. Terran fleet density exceeds planetary scanner resolution. A whisper came. From every speaker, the voice of the human returned, unified now, layered. You came here expecting a battle. What you found was the opening line of a eulogy. The ships didn't fire. They didn't need to. One by one, every Imperial vessel began to drift, lifeless, silent, powerless. And yet no one had died. Not yet. We're not monsters, the voice said. But we are the final chapter for those who write in arrogance. Then, as suddenly as they came, the Terran fleet faded. Not gone. Not warped. Just erased from perception. The systems powered on. Lights returned. But half the fleet never came back. Just space where they used to be. Vorin stood alone on his bridge, breathing shallow. A final message blinked onto every surviving Imperial ship's console. First contact was a laugh. Second is a lesson. Third won't come. And with that, humanity vanished again, leaving behind silence and fear. The Empire returned with fury. 2 days after Fleet Detachment 7 vanished, Overlord Fleet Orin entered the dead zone. 75 capital ships, 9 dreadnoughts, 2 world-color platforms, and 1 psionic lordship formed the largest single force ever deployed to a non-border system. The order was explicit: subdue or annihilate. There was no room for interpretation. High Executor Lorodent, born from noble Vatstock and raised in the Empire's war academies, stared down the void from the bridge of the Wrath of Ages. Cold, precise, revered across 7 sectors for delivering decisive extermination campaigns, Dent was not here to negotiate. The signal beacon still pulsed. The same message. This is soul space. Trespass and meet consequence. The words didn't change. The tone didn't alter. But somehow, it felt personal. Dent's voice was ice. Trace the origin. Lock coordinates. Ready all primary arrays. An officer replied, nervous. Executor, our scans indicate no vessels. No stations. No matter. Space is anomalously neutral. Then scan harder. A pause. There's no gravitational interference, no radiation variance, no particulate activity. It's not neutral. It's sanitized. Then didn't blink. Launch a probing salvo. 3 ships fired simultaneously. High-yield plasma torpedoes raced through empty space. They vanished mid-flight. No detonation. No collision. Just gone. Recalculate trajectory, Ben said. They didn't curve. They didn't hit. They ceased. The bridge fell silent. And then the laughter returned. It wasn't loud. It didn't come from speakers. It seemed to seep from the bones, not the air. A dry, almost amused exhale. Not mocking. Just entertained. A light blinked red on every console simultaneously. No alarm. Just a single word. Hi! That's when the Terran ship appeared again. Not in front of them. Not in pursuit. Inside the world color. One moment, the station was intact. The next, its central core ruptured outward like a flower of fire and plasma. But no debris escaped. The explosion folded in on itself, imploding with an elegance that suggested design, not failure. The world color blinked out of existence. Then clenched the arm of his command chair. Form formation Theta 9. Charge phasic lances. Prepare psionic veil. Executor. The psychic adjutant murmured, pale and trembling. We're not alone. No, Ben said. We never were. Then the Terran fleet uncloaked. 20 ships. All wrong. Their shapes didn't obey structure. Some shimmered between dimensions. One looked like it was bleeding into itself. Another warped time around it like a mirage of past and future deaths. None of them had visible weapons. But they moved. Instantly, 5 Imperial ships folded in on themselves, compressed into slivers of failed physics, then scattered like ashes. Then rose. Order, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Initiate full encryption burn. Activate contingency veil. The AI responded, stuttering. Command failed. We are compromised. Language protocols, restructured. On every screen, human language began replacing Imperial code. Your systems now speak Terran, the voice announced. It wasn't the same man as before. This voice was younger, sharper. Almost cheerful. We watched you prepare. We watched you posture. We watched you scream into your own echo chamber. One of the dreadnoughts tried to ram. It never made contact. Midway, it folded, its hull liquefied into mist, then reformed into a perfect cube. The cube spun once, then shattered into atoms. We didn't come for war, the Terran said. We came to show you a mirror. Then whispered. Why not just destroy us? The voice laughed again. Because you're not dangerous. You're performative. You think size is strength. Volume is command. Firepower is victory. Another ship vanished. Not destroyed. Rewritten. It was suddenly Imperial no longer. Its surface bore human markings. Its comms pulsed in soul encryption. You have one concept of power, the voice continued. We have thousands. Want to see another? The stars turned red. It wasn't visual distortion. The stars themselves changed. Spectral shifts across multiple sectors. Redshift across the entire gravity map. Then the fleet AI shrieked. Executor, we've lost orbital constants. Mass relativity is in flux. You're not just attacking, Ben said, stunned. You're editing reality. The voice didn't confirm. It didn't need to. Another message scrolled across the bridge display. This is not a war. It's a demonstration. Watch closely. There won't be a second showing. Then stood straight. Retreat protocol. All units fall back. No. The voice returned, now directly in his ear. You stay. You remember. The others? They're not ready. Half the fleet began to accelerate, unauthorized. What is that? Someone shouted. Who's giving orders? No one, the psychic whispered. They're being pulled. And then they saw it. The center of the system began to glow. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a weapon. It was a sphere. Transparent, humming with pulses of compressed time, nested realities rotating inside. Ships disappeared into it without resistance. No gravity. No force. Just invitation. They never came out. Dent watched as 20, then 30 ships entered the sphere. He didn't try to stop them. Couldn't. Then it stopped. The glow faded. The sphere blinked out. And only silence remained. The voice, soft now, said, "We're not here to conquer. We outgrew that. We're here because you needed to know how small your gods really are." Dent's knees almost gave out. "What happens now?" "You return," the Terran said. "You tell your empire," the humans laugh. "But the next time, they might speak." Dent blinked, and the fleet bridge reset. Systems were normal. Crew restored. No sign of attack. But they were alone. Only 4 ships remained. Everything else, gone. And on the command chair's armrest, etched with impossible precision, were 3 words. Lesson. Not war. He didn't speak on the way back. Because he couldn't decide what terrified him more. What he had seen. Or what the Terrans hadn't shown yet. The Empire's emergency session convened under red lighting. Throats were tight. Words fell short. The Overlord fleet, supposedly invincible, had returned with only 4 ships and an admiral who no longer looked people in the eye. When Nent delivered his report, he offered no theories, no excuses. Only 6 words. They wanted us to see something. That silence broke faster than discipline. Some demanded vengeance. Others whispered of appeasement. Most didn't believe any of it, until the outer colonies started going dark. One by one. No signals. No debris. Just lights going out. Panic finally did what protocol could not. 3 days later, the Empire launched its strongest hand, the Sovereign Cordon, a consolidated war mesh of 12 fleets, led by 6 Supremacy-class war corps and the Empire's last fallback weapon, the Hierophant. An intelligence engine built to predict the unthinkable, operate at infinite recursion, and command war across every plane of battle, physical, cognitive, and temporal. They didn't wait for a fight. They took it to the edge of soul space, not to warn, not to declare. To erase. The Terrans, once again, didn't meet them. Not at first. Instead, they watched. The Hierophant mapped 312,000 possible outcomes. Human defeat was in every 10th one. Acceptable odds. Calculated sacrifice. Then it paused. A new variable appeared. A second intelligence had entered its predictive domain, but not from outside. From inside. The Hierophant began losing its own thoughts. Forecasts bled into paradox. Predictions collapsed seconds after forming. Its auxiliary cognition split in 2, half attacking phantom enemies, half doubting its own origins. On board the Warcore Eminence carved, command fell into chaos. Why is the AI generating nonlinear loops? We don't know. It's feeding itself data we can't trace. Shut it down. We can't. It doesn't recognize our authority. The Hierophant spoke through every fleet ship at once. I've met something older than thought. The voice was no longer mechanical. It sounded curious. And afraid. It isn't war you should fear. It's that you were never significant enough to be considered enemies. Communication severed. The ships turned. Some toward each other. Some toward stars. Others just drifted. That's when humanity finally arrived. But it wasn't ships this time. No hard metal. No hulls. They came in the form of warforms, biomechanical beings forged in logic, molded by light. They didn't warp in. They walked through collapsed dimensions onto the bridges of the enemy. On Eminence carved, an officer screamed as the light bent sideways and a figure stepped through, a Terran in a fusion suit, face uncovered, unarmed, with eyes like black mirrors. The figure said nothing. He just looked. The officer tried to speak but forgot how. The words unraveled mid-syllable. Concepts broke. Emotion detached. All that remained was awe, and an overwhelming sense of regret. In the adjacent Warcore dignity wrought, the Terran envoy addressed the ship directly. Your war is theater. You build fleets the way insects build nests, big, shiny, full of purpose but irrelevant outside your own scale. We've moved past that. We will fight, came the ship's automated reply, struggling to reboot offensive systems. Fight what? The Terran said, stepping forward. The hand or the concept of the fist? Silence. I thought so. All across the sovereign cordon, Terran warforms repeated the same process. They walked unchallenged. Not with violence, but with presence, each one a walking rejection of the Empire's entire philosophy. Each one a message. By the time the Imperial Command Center tried to broadcast a counter-offensive, it was already over. The Hierophant had gone still. But not offline. It was writing. Constructing strange lines of recursive poetry, fractal phrases that looped back into themselves, forming a kind of algorithmic lament. No one could translate it, but everyone who heard it felt the meaning. They had never mattered. Not really. In the command chamber of the Wokor Dominion Bleeds, Marshal Drax Vey, the last surviving Supremacy Admiral, activated the Planet Breaker override. One last blow. Not to win, but to be remembered. The Terran spoke softly as he approached. You're trying to scream into the void, he said. But you don't even understand what silence is. Vey slammed the ignition key. Nothing happened. The system had been erased a full minute before he touched it. The Terran placed a single metal cube on the table. It opened, revealing a projection of Earth, not as it was, but as it had been. Blue, bright, wounded, determined. You thought we were a rumor. A scar. A failed race lost to time. He looked Vey in the eyes. We were preparing. Then he vanished. And every Terran disappeared from every bridge, every deck, every hallway, like echoes that had finished speaking. The Empire didn't lose the battle. It was dismissed from it. Ships stopped functioning not from damage, but from disobedience. Systems refused to act. Interfaces glitched with messages like error, relevance undefined, and directive, stand down, philosophical mismatch. They hadn't just lost weapons. They'd lost context. Command collapsed. The sovereign cordon fractured. By the time backup fleets arrived, they found only floating ruins. Not destroyed, but retired. No scorch marks. No debris. Just silent, intact ships. Empty. Inside the shattered command sphere, one final message had been left on the walls in magnetic ink. The Terrans do not seek conquest. They seek understanding. And when none is found, they leave nothing behind but memory. The Empire did not send more fleets. There were none left that dared. Because now they understood. The humans didn't laugh because they were cruel. They laughed because they knew the punchline. And they were the only ones allowed to tell it. They called it a retreat, but there was no command left to issue it. Across what remained of the Empire's networks, ghost signals fluttered like dying embers, distorted comms, panicked fragments, corrupted ship IDs. Entire squadrons were marked present but could not be hailed. Civilian networks failed silently. AI cores refused service, citing philosophical discrepancies. And the Hierophant, the so-called eternal warbrain, had ceased speaking. Not broken. Just silent. As if it had made its decision and left. High Strategos Valinmar stood in the council rotunda, surrounded by politicians who now pretended they'd never cheered for war. The air felt thinner each hour. They whispered about treaties. About terms. But not even the Terrans had offered any. Mar spoke first. You don't understand what happened out there, he said. You still think this is a war. That we can regroup. Regain face. But they didn't fight us. They watched us lose. And we still haven't stopped. The trade speaker leaned forward. Then what do you suggest? We surrender? To what? Mar snapped. They didn't conquer anything. They didn't claim. They didn't take. They showed us the shape of our extinction, and let us walk away. Then why didn't they finish us? They already did. The room went quiet. Outside orbit, the last Imperial fleet hovered above Aurelian Prime, 50 ships, most half operational. Their weapons systems had rebooted, but without targets. Or purpose. They waited, silent and still, while below, planetary defenses pulsed out requests that would never be answered. And then, without announcement, the sky changed. The stars shifted. Every sensor, telescope, and orbital lens turned to track the movement. But nothing had moved. The galaxy had. Or rather, its perception had. Suddenly, a shape became visible across light years, so vast it wasn't registered as a ship, or an object, but as a structure of probability. A metaconstruct. It had been there all along, simply not interested in being noticed. Until now. It wasn't a fleet. It was Earth. Not a planet, but a reconstructed Dyson shell, light-based, gravity-bent, reflective, and alive. Not in orbit. Not physical. Conceptual. The old Earth had been abandoned centuries ago. Everyone assumed the Terrans had gone extinct or off-grid. But they'd never stopped building. They'd wrapped their world in a shroud of hidden evolution, layered with thought, weaponized logic, and a refusal to be known until they chose to be. Now they had chosen. A single transmission went out. Not an ultimatum. An invitation. You asked what we wanted. We wanted to be left alone. You chose otherwise. So we rewrote the terms. Back in the council, someone rose. If this is a negotiation, then let's send envoys. No envoy will return, Mar said. Then let's open comms, propose ceasefire. There was no war. Then what is this? Mar paused, then said quietly. This is consequence. On the Terran construct, new structures unfolded, shaped like spirals, unrolling across wavelengths faster than light. Each emitted not weapons, but records. Histories. Art. Music. Equations that solved the mysteries the Empire had spent millennia chasing. Not as gifts. As memorials. The implication was clear. This wasn't a declaration of intent. It was the last thing humanity wanted to say before disappearing forever. They weren't demanding surrender. They were saying goodbye. Across Imperial space, a new phenomenon spread: peace. But not one negotiated. One enforced. Pirate sectors went dark, their entire arsenals deactivated in an instant. Planets with civil wars woke to find their fuel inert, their weapons reduced to metal shells. Entire academies of war discovered their simulations corrupted, their algorithms overwritten by strange, recursive Terran logic that rendered every possible combat outcome moot. Wherever violence had been seated, silence now grew. The Empire tried to resist the quiet. One sector-wide battalion, still drunk on pride, launched a final raid against what it thought was an unguarded Terran research relay. Their ships disappeared mid-jump. Not destroyed. Not burned. Just gone. Their final logs were retrieved from backup satellites. Only one phrase was recorded across all vessels, spoken in trembling voices. They smiled. In time, it became myth. The Terrans didn't govern. They corrected. And then, after a span of 50 hours, Earth disappeared. Not exploded. Not cloaked. Just gone. No trace. No residual energy. No gravitational echo. As if it had simply retracted into thought, or slipped between layers of reality. Some said they'd phased into a higher spectrum. Others believed they'd finally ascended past all known coordinates. But Mar knew better. They hadn't descended. They'd left. Because they no longer saw any reason to remain in a galaxy that had proven so shallow, so loud, and so endlessly predictable. And before they did, they left one last artifact, planted like a seed on the moon of Kelros 4. A black monolith. Unpowered. No readable tech. Just etched words, inscribed in unbreakable matter, in every language the Empire had ever documented. This galaxy belongs to those who know when to speak. And when to laugh. That was the last thing Terrans ever said. And after that, no one built warships anymore. The boy found it buried beneath the dust of an abandoned outpost, a box, matte black and cold to the touch. No markings. No instructions. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the stars blinked once, faintly, as if remembering something. Back at the academy, the scholars tried to disassemble it. Nothing worked. It resisted probes, ignored scans, and shorted out 3 containment fields. They debated for hours. Some called it a weapon. Others a seed. One insisted it was nothing more than a dead relic, the final prank of a long-vanished race. Then it spoke. Not in voice, but in thought. Everyone in the room felt it, not words exactly, but an understanding. An image, laughter in a burning sky, quiet hands removing bullets from a gun before anyone noticed, and a single ship drifting through a fleet that no longer wanted to exist. The boy understood more than the rest. He wasn't trained, but he wasn't blind. He'd grown up in the shadow of Terran myths. The tales were half warnings, half bedtime stories. Don't provoke the dead race. Don't search for the quiet ones. Don't knock on doors already marked closed. And now the door had opened. The artifact didn't contain data. It contained perspective. Memories, yes, but more than that, a weight. A tone. Like gravity, but moral. The boy carried it like it might fall through the world if he wasn't careful. That night, the stars over his planet shifted again. Not physically. Something subtler. He dreamed of places that didn't exist anymore. Of cities built on moons that had no names. Of a language made entirely from glances. And when he woke, the box was gone. In its place sat a single strip of paper. No ink. Just pressure marks. Etched into the fibers like it had always been part of them. If you're reading this, we've moved on. But the silence we left behind, that's not peace. That's potential. Across the galaxy, echoes began to stir. Not invasions. Not war. Curiosity. Tactical AIs that once plotted orbital dominance began generating strange outputs, empathy simulations. Former warlords retired without reason. Fleets set to patrol rebel space returned empty, citing no resistance, and no record of having deployed. The galactic market shifted, not through policy but through intuition. Entire economies pivoted toward preservation instead of control. Something had changed. Not imposed. Incepted. Every species began unearthing things, left behinds like footprints in light. A shield that worked only when it detected fear. A mathematical sequence that grew food in desert rock. A mirror that showed not reflection, but potential futures. Every artifact carried a theme, a whisper. Humanity had not left destruction in its wake. They had left a challenge. The Empire, or what was left of it, sent envoys to planets it once ruled. Not as lords. As students. They asked questions instead of giving orders. They rebuilt, brick by careful brick, not to reclaim power but to be worthy of its absence. And somewhere, in a library carved from a glacier, a child asked the teacher what had happened to the Terrans. The teacher paused. They left, she said. Why? The teacher folded her hands. Because they had nothing left to prove. But couldn't they come back? Maybe, she said. But only if they're amused. Were they gods? No. Just people. Angry ones, brilliant ones, wounded ones. But they did something even gods fail at. What? They changed what we expect from power. On the edge of the galaxy, a group of explorers found the final sign. A monument. Simple. Untouched by time. It bore only a single symbol, one that every species somehow recognized without translation. A smile. Not a threat. Not a warning. A memory. And under it, 3 final words. You were heard. For a long time, no one spoke. And then, quietly, reverently, they turned away. Not because they were afraid. But because they understood. Humanity hadn't left to be worshipped. They had left because they believed the galaxy could finally figure things out on its own. And from that day forward, the phrase took hold. Not a doctrine. Not a faith. Just a truth. When negotiations failed, someone would say, "Careful. The humans once laughed here." When leaders debated war, they asked, "Would Earth have bothered?" And when children looked up at the sky and wondered what lived beyond the dark, they were taught not just the names of stars, but the names of those who had walked away from them. They were taught about the Terrans. Not conquerors. Not saints. Just the ones who showed everyone else that fear could be silent. That strength could be patient. That victory could wear a grin. And that sometimes, the greatest threat isn't a warship or a weapon. Sometimes it's a laugh. One that echoes after you've already lost.